faith and good deeds. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone among you ill? Let them call the leaders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective.
Is this one working? Yes, it's good morning, everybody. My name's Dave. I'm part of the leadership team here at the church, and I'm going to talk a bit about James. When Nathan earlier said, if you want to, you can go next door to the LRC and watch this on the live stream in the warmth, I had visions of you all leaving the room and me standing in here on my own. But it is available. If you want to go and be warm, do go around the corner. You can watch on the live stream. But I want to talk to us about James. And if you've been here for the last couple of weeks, you'll know Nathan talked, I think, about chapter 3 last week, and Rebecca talked about chapter 2 a couple of weeks ago. It's this reasonably famous book in the New Testament that's got this, it's got lots of big thoughts in it, but one big thought in it is the one that we just read a little cameo of in chapter 2 there, that faith without deeds, faith without work is dead. That's quite a big thing to say, and it sounds a bit different, as Rebecca told us, and I'm going to follow on a little bit from some of the things Rebecca talked about. Sounds a bit different to some of the things you might read in some of the books that Paul wrote and some of the letters that Paul wrote. It sounds a bit different to some of that theology. I don't actually think it is, so I'm going to talk to us a bit about why I think it's the one and the same thing. I want to talk to us about two characters, first of all, a bit of Paul's theology, and then Martin Luther. Nathan already referred to Martin Luther. In the 1400s and 1500s, that great reformer, the start of Protestantism, and the fallout he had with the Catholic Church. And I want to talk about those because it relates to where James places in this whole story. When we're reading these big characters and big bits of theology and history, we talk about this a lot, don't we? But unless we read those stories and that theology in its context, unless we understand what was going on for the authors, who they were talking to, why they were saying it, we can totally misunderstand what's going on. And even worse, we can import our understanding of the world, 21st century capitalist, individualistic society into this theology and read completely the wrong thing through them. So it's really important that we always sort of grapple with why people were saying the things they did. So if we look at Paul's theology, first of all, Paul, again, you probably know loads about Paul, but as a Jewish man, and he was somebody that persecuted Christians, and then he had that experience on the Damascus Road where he got this revelation about Christianity and the purpose of life and the life message and example of Jesus, and went off around the Mediterranean talking to people about this inclusive story that was not just for the Jewish people but for all people. Now, Paul in his context, there are lots of verses in the letters that Paul wrote that sound a bit like it's saying the exact opposite of James. It sounds like James is saying faith without works is dead, you need works, and Paul seems to be saying the exact opposite, which is it's got nothing to do with works, it's by faith alone, you'll be saved by faith alone. And it feels like Paul is saying the complete opposite to James. I don't think he is. He's off around the known world in the Mediterranean talking to people about this inclusive message that is not just for the Jews, for everybody. And he's sometimes talking to Messianic Jews that were trying to follow the life message and example of Jesus. And what happened is they've turned this big expansive story into some rules that you need to follow. They're starting to write boundary markers. They're starting to say, well, you can be in this club as long as you're circumcised. You can be in this club as long as you follow the purity laws. And Paul says, hang on a minute, it's not about that. This is about the faithfulness of this gracious God to all of humanity. It's not about those works. You've boiled down this inclusive story, which is for the whole world and everybody in it, to follow these rules in the Torah. He's not really having a go at the rules particularly. Paul's a Jew. He's come out of that entire story. But he is saying, if you boil this entire story down to those few bits of works and start writing it up as boundary markers for who's in and who's out, well, I'm not on board at that point. This is about something much different. And you probably, I think Rebecca talked about this, but Steve's written a brilliant book, The Lost Message of Paul, which talks about, in much more detail than I'm about to, about why we've misunderstood Paul. Paul's talking about not just faith, but faithfulness. So there's this Greek word that if you read Steve's book, he goes to town on explaining. But there's this Greek word called pistis in the New Testament. And whenever you see the word faith, the Greek translation is pistis. And pistis actually means, or can mean, faithfulness. The faithfulness of God towards humanity. Not our faith and what we can muster up, but God's faithfulness to us. We are all included in because of the faithfulness of God. So, Paul in his context is saying it's not about these particular works that you've picked that are boundary markers. God is faithful to all of humanity. Everyone is included in the love of God. Let me move on and just talk about Martin Luther, hundreds of years later now. So Martin Luther, this reformer who was having a falling out with the Catholic Church, and there only was the Catholic Church at the time, and Martin Luther is saying, you've taken this expansive understanding of who God is, what the life message and example of Jesus is, and you've corrupted it. You've turned it, he had this real problem with indulgences, about indulgences where in effect it had become a get out of jail free card. It had been turned into this transactional money-making scheme. If we frighten people enough that they're going to go to hell and then say, but you can buy an indulgence to get out of jail free to avoid it, you can do it for those people that are dead and you can do it for yourselves. It had become this corrupt scheme which was about frightening people and then monetizing having frightened people. And Martin Luther's saying, you've taken this story of the loving, expansive Jesus and turned it into this corrupt, transactional thing. Martin Luther, by the way, solves one problem and goes on to create a massive other problem for the church, as Rebecca set out to us. He then says, well, it's not that, it's by faith alone, and faith alone we've then taken to mean intellectual understanding of bits of doctrine and set up our own different boundary markers. If you believe this thing, you're in. If you don't believe this thing and don't say the right words, you're out. And we set up an entirely different problem through Martin Luther. James is saying something completely different, I think. And it's very similar to what Paul's saying. I think James is saying, seek to be faithful to the life, message, and example of Jesus. Faithfulness doesn't mean we'll get it right all the time either. Faithfulness means there'll be ups and downs, sometimes where we're doing a great job, sometimes where we're doing a terrible job. Faithfulness is about continually choosing to reorient ourselves to the life, message, and example of Jesus. And then James is saying, if we're being faithful to that story, that loving story, well, there's no other option, but it will show up in who we are and what we do in the world. It just has to. What we do in the world will shape who we are will shape what we do in the world, and it will all flow out of us seeking to be faithful to this big story, the way. That is no different to what Paul's saying. Paul is saying everyone's in. Follow the inclusive way of Jesus. Let's be honouring of that. Be faithful to that story, and it will show up in who we are and what we do in the world. Galatians, when Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit being love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all of those things are that. Be faithful to the big messaging and example of Jesus, and it will show up in who we are and what we do in the world. It's no different to Paul. I think that Paul and Martin Luther have got this cautionary tale built into them. I think they're saying something like this. Humanity is brilliant at taking these big, rich stories and turning them into some rules, and then forgetting why we ever wrote the rules and just following the rules without. So Paul is saying that the Jewish story is you've just turned this into some rules, follow the Torah things, and hundreds of years later you'll have probably forgotten why you were doing those particular things. Martin Luther's saying something differently. You've taken this big extensive story and turned it into this transactional thing, and you're just following that because that's the way we do it. Over Christmas, I'm not sure if this is a brilliant analogy, but I just think it's funny, so I'm going to tell you anyway. Over Christmas, I spent time with Anna's family, and it's always hilarious spending time with Anna's family because they are terrible at idioms. They get idioms wrong the whole time. So I overheard Anna's sister once talking about somebody that was only good at, well, not only good, but was particularly good at one thing, and she said, well, the trouble with him, he's a one-track donkey rather than a one-trick pony. And over Christmas, I overheard Anna and her sister talking about how something was a damp squid with a D on the end of it. Well, like, it's not a damp squid, it's a damp squib with a B on the end. And so we had this conversation. I said, it's not a squid, it's a squib. And they were like, yeah, but it is a damp squid because squid live in the sea. They're damp, aren't they? And I said, well, it's not, it's a squib. But then, to be fair, they said, well, what on earth is a squib? Does anybody in this room know what a squib is? There you go. You're going to learn something now. A squib is a firework. So a damp squib is something that's not quite as exciting as you expect it to be because it's a damp firework. But the analogy in here, and we'll get to the end of the story, the analogy in here was like, we use words, we've taken things that did have rich meaning and like forgotten what on earth that meaning was about. And humanity is brilliant at that, taking rich things, reducing it down into something and then just doing it, saying it, using it because it's the stuff we do without really massively thinking about it. Let me give you a slightly better analogy. At work, so I work for Oasis, and like some of my job is dealing with our HR stuff and our policies and the way we treat staff. And our policies are always written up with this like rich spirit of something in them. They're about how do we treat people fairly? How do we treat people equitably? How are we relational? How are we loving towards people? How do we like balance all of those things together and treat humans with dignity and respect? And then we write some rules about, well, here are the things you should do, and like here's how the policy works. And I often get involved, and Danielle's sitting up there, we both get involved in these things at the end of the processes sometimes and find we've written all the rules and we've followed all the rules brilliantly. And we've written letters to people, and we've done it all on time, and we've done it within the number of days that we said we should do it, and all of that stuff. But we've shown no humanity whatsoever. We've like lost the relational spirit of the thing. This hasn't been massively fair to a person. It hasn't treated people with dignity and respect. And often we have to say, hang on a minute, the whole spirit of this thing was supposed to be something different. We take the spirit of something, we turn it into rules, and then we follow rules slavishly without thinking about why we've done them, and we lose the spirit of the thing. And I think Martin Luther and Paul are sort of saying that in two completely different contexts. Don't forget the spirit of this thing. Don't turn it into rules that you follow slavishly. Hold yourself accountable to the spirit of something. We've got to keep this rich and dynamic spirit of the way of Jesus really alive. And I think there's a cautionary tale for us in there. So two things, a bit of context for us and a challenge. So context is, we're in this community hub here, and we've talked about all the things we like doing in this neighbourhood. We like to think of ourselves as socially activist. Like, why are we doing any of that? Is it because, we turn up on a Sunday and sing some songs, and that's what you do on a Sunday, and we like doing a bit of community work because randomly we set up a charity, so we're doing some stuff in the community because that's what you do? Or is there a much richer, deeper spirit behind it that we need to keep reminding ourselves about? We're socially activist because we're progressive. We're socially activist because we think it's good for other people. We're socially activist because we're one of those churches that believe in a social gospel. We're socially activist because we're trying our best, and we don't always get it right, to follow the way, the life, the example of Jesus. And because we're trying to do that, nothing else can happen other than our care for the world around us, our care for society. Rebecca read to us this brilliant quote. It's from a theologian called Richard Bauckham about James. It says this: James's way is neither the transformation of individuals, nor is it just change in the structures of society. But instead, James's way is the formation of a countercultural community which lives an alternative social and economic relation in advance of the coming of the kingdom. James's way is not the transformation of individuals, nor is it just the transformation of structures in society. It's a countercultural community which lives out a social and economic revolution in advance of the coming of the kingdom. We've got to make sure that that's the driving force behind what we do. Not that we turn up and sing some songs because it's nice and we do some community work because that's what we've always done, but because we are this revolutionary movement together. By the way, when James is talking about works and deeds, he's not talking about volunteerism. James is talking about all the stuff that flows from our choosing to be as faithful as we can be to the story and the life of Jesus. And that might be, I might be trying to do that, and my passion and my skill might be a pastoral one. I might be trying to do that, and my passion and my skill as a result of that might be helping our community to have deep wisdom. I might be trying to do that, and my passion and skill might be like activism and implementing and turning stuff into practical reality. But it's all of those things added together. This is not a dichotomy between like a sort of reflective thing and an activist thing. Rebecca talked to us, I think this is the challenge. Rebecca talked to us brilliantly 2 weeks ago about we've got to be careful not to make all of this stuff a burden. Like, it can sound a bit like if you're not careful, unless you're volunteering every 10 minutes, you're not a proper Christian type thing. You can't be a proper member of our community. That's not what this is about at all, and we need to be really, really careful not to do that. So do go back and listen to that if you weren't here. But I do think it is our job to make sure that we are continually trying to keep the spirit of what we're about alive. We're continually trying to remind ourselves what the big story that this all sits in is. And we need to be careful in the way that Nath just talked about, not to set up false binaries. It's not like there's some spiritual reflective stuff and there's some activist stuff and we're trying to work out how they fit together. It's all the same thing. If we're following the life and the life, the message of Jesus, of course it's about reflection. Of course it's about us trying to be as deeply spiritual as we can be. And of course that turns into, well, how are we going to show up in the world? What are we going to do together? It's all the same thing. At Oasis, we've been doing a sort of brand exercise the last couple of years. And when you're doing a brand exercise, you sit in a room with people come along and sort of help you think about the brand. And these people turn up in skinny jeans and more beanie hats than I find comfortable. And they sit in a room with you and start asking, if Oasis was a vegetable, what type of vegetable would it be? And you have these bizarre conversations. But then they do this sort of brand profiling thing, and they talk about your brand and their personalities, and they've got this wheel of brand personalities, and you can be different types of personalities on the spectrum. And Oasis, when you talk to it, always comes out two different sides of this spectrum. So one side of the spectrum, it comes out, it's called the outlaw on their spectrum, but it's like this sort of activist, revolutionary outlaw thing. And then the exact other side of the wheel, it comes out as this sort of relational, community-oriented, people-centered, what they call everyman side of the personality wheel. And when you sit with these brand people, they're like, well, that's weird, isn't it? Like, you've come out of these two polar opposite things. But I sit there thinking, of course we do. Like, the life message and example of Jesus is relational and activist and social, and it's bound to flow out in that way if we're following it. And I don't see how you get away from that. We need to be a church, therefore, that is excited and passionate and evangelical about the fact that we want to follow this extraordinary life messaging and example of Jesus, which is for everybody in this community, everybody in the world, that is going to transform who we are and how our world exists. I think we need to really set a light under that fire. This community work stuff that we do. Rebecca talked about 3 examples of community work 2 weeks ago, and she said, look, we might run a shop across the road, and we might do a campaign around bailiffs and how Lambeth Council are using bailiffs to go and collect money off people, and we might do a housing campaign. That's not stuff that we sort of set up a charity of professionals to do some stuff. That is our mission. And there might be other stuff. It might not be just those things. And Nathan, as he was asking me to do this talk, was saying, put your hand up if there are things in this room that in you following the life message and example of Jesus want to achieve, either in this community or where you live or in your workplace. That's our job, to find out what those things are together as a community. Rebecca brilliantly said to us, this book and lots of books in the New Testament are written to communities of people, not to individual people. And we often forget that. I often forget that. We sort of read these things and think they are personally written to me, Dave, and I've got to work out how those instructions apply to my life. And I think it's quite an alien concept to us that like something like this might be written to us together. I think it's quite a struggle to actually get your head around that if you really think about it. But if you do think about it, and I think that chapter 5 that we just read, it means that in a community there will be some of us that at any one moment need to receive from a community, and in a place where we actually need the support and carrying of a community. And like, you know, Nathan said, there are people with lanyards on, come and talk to somebody. If that's you, that's what this community is for. There are equally people in this community who are in a place of being able to give to the community, and that's a brilliant thing too, because we hold each other together. If this is written to a community rather than an individual, it means that we don't have to be the whole package on our own. I don't have to be brilliant pastorally, a brilliant activist, a brilliant communicator, we do that together. James is saying, follow the way, you all, and you all will show up in the world, and you all will do great stuff in the world if you are being faithful to the way. And equally, if we're doing it as a community, there'll be some of us that are doing a really good job of being faithful and are thinking about how we orient ourselves really well, and at points in time there'll be some of us that feel further away from that, and that will all change over time. But it's brilliant that these books are written to a community, because we get to hold all of that together as one community together. It means that if we are being faithful to the way and then working out who we are and how that shows up in the world, some of us will be brilliant at hospitality, and that will be the thing that really lights our fire. If we're being faithful to the way and working out who we are and how that shows up in the world, some of us in this room will be the people that aren't wonderful activists, but are deep in wisdom and can think of how we deepen what we do and why we do it. There'll be some of us in the room that, as we're thinking about being faithful to the way, are brilliant at implementing stuff and project managing stuff and turning thoughts into reality. There'll be some of us in the room that are justice warriors and have got that edge to us and really need to push the boundaries of stuff, and that's a brilliant thing. There'll be some of us in this room, as we're being faithful to the way of Jesus and thinking how do we show up in the world, that are really prayerful and can help to make sure that we actually keep the spirit of the whole thing alive and vibrant, and all of the things in between. We did a course in Oasis a couple of weeks ago with a group of leaders, and we were doing one of those leadership development things. Have you come across Belbin? Or you've probably done that, but it's like leadership personality types and your place in a team, and you fill out a little sort of questionnaire, and then it spits out where you place in the team and what your strengths are and what some of the things you might need to work on are. And you could be a resource investigator or a team worker or a coordinator or a specialist or a shaper or an implementer, and there are all these different definitions. And it was really fascinating doing this with this team, because we found out at the end of it that there were loads of really good implementers, but there weren't very many completer finishers. We found there were loads of good shapers, but there weren't very many resource investigators that were going to go and pull in new resource into our team. And you sort of looked across the team and found where we got strengths and weaknesses and what we needed to work on together. I think James is right into us together and saying, as you try and follow the way, and as you think about how that shows up in the world, who you are and what you do, you'll have this mixture of strengths and abilities across your team of people as you do that. This task of working out how we are faithful to the way of Jesus and how that plays out in the world, I think is more important than it's ever been, certainly in my lifetime. We seem to live in a world at the moment where, as long as you believe the right bits of doctrine and can say some of the right things, you can do whatever you want in life. Just take Donald Trump over the weekend. I think he probably will be able to sign up to some bits of doctrine and say the right things, and then does some awful stuff in the world. That's a very dangerous world to be in. But I think an equal problem, though, I think in our country, and particularly in our society, I think we live in societies that are sometimes a little bit uncoupled from any sort of ethical framework for making decisions about life. I've been listening to loads of podcasts over the last few weeks about AI and the impact of AI on our lives and what it's going to do to work and what it's going to do to the environment and what it's going to do to truth and the media and politics. And I don't think as a society we've got any ethical framework whatsoever for being able to work out how on earth we engage with this unbelievable technology that's coming our way. The only bit of ethical framework is, as far as I can see it, well, if we can make money out of it, we better make sure we're at the front of the queue. Like, that's no ethical framework. We have lost any ability to be able to set an ethical framework around how we respond to those things. I think we've lost it in our media. It doesn't get talked about. I think we've lost it in our politics. It doesn't get talked about. I think we've even lost it in our education system. It's difficult to talk about. Like, how does ethics show up in this? And I think that's a real problem for us as a country. Faithfulness to the way not only is this amazing ethical framework for us to think about how we respond to the world in front of us, but it is also this very exciting task about us punching holes in the darkness. That bit of the quote that Rebecca read to us actually being able to build the kingdom of God in advance, or the kingdom of God coming right here, right now. It is this ethical framework for us, and it is this very, very exciting task for us all. I was speaking to somebody during the week as I was planning this talk and was saying, what on earth am I going to say on Sunday? And they said, well, they're not somebody that goes to church, as you will work out from this quote in a minute. They said, well, if I were you, Dave, I'd tell them Christianity's an anachronistic waste of time. It's got no relevance to the modern world, and it's an excuse for people to meet violence out on one another. I said, that's going to need a little bit of dressing up. It is our job to demonstrate that that is not true. It's none of those things. Being faithful to the way and working out how it shapes us and what we do in the world is not anachronistic. It's not a waste of time. It's not something that is an excuse to meet violence out on one another. And by the way, it's not bystanding either. It's not us sitting in a room singing songs and having a lovely time together where the world falls apart around us. We've got to demonstrate that this is like a vital, exciting, driving force that shoves us into the world as a group of people that want to show up following the life, message and example of Jesus. So I'm going to stop and leave us with these three questions. How do we continually make sure the spirit of what we're about is alive, not just the stuff? How do we make sure that we're not just doing community stuff because, Steve set Oasis up like that, so I think that's what we do. How do we make sure the spirit of what we're doing is alive and well and is driving? How do we make sure we've got fire in our bellies for this countercultural revolution together in this neighbourhood, in our workplace, in the places we live, in society in general? What are the things we need to do together to make sure that we've got that fire alive in us? Secondly, what does seeking to be faithful mean to me, to us? What skills do I therefore bring to the party? What passions do I bring to the party as I'm thinking about how I'm faithful to the life, message and example of Jesus? Rebecca gave us those three examples. It might be I can get involved in helping to get the shop front going, or the housing stuff, or a campaign around bailiffs in Lambeth. It might be a million other things too. This church has only ever lived on the back of the passions and enthusiasms and the skills of people in this room who have thought, how am I trying to be faithful to the way of Jesus, and what does that mean for how I show up and what I do? The food bank that we run, you might look at as this sort of multi-million-pound food bank with a warehouse and trucks and lorries and deliveries, and it actually started by one person sitting in this congregation in this room saying, because I am trying to be faithful to the way of Jesus, I can do no more than think, well, people need to be fed properly, don't they? And so they started buying food parcels for people at Christmas, and out of that, over 20 years of food bank has developed. The community centre next door started as a coffee shop in this building. There was a little kettle behind that pillar over there, and there was somebody called Joyce that thought, I'm going to bake cakes in this community because I'm trying to be faithful to the way of Jesus. And out of that has spawned a load of things. The school that we're sitting in spawned out of this congregation saying, how do we be faithful to the life, message and example of Jesus? There's no great education in this community. Perhaps we should go and stand outside Iceland and get people to sign up to a secondary school. We can take all of some of this stuff for granted as it's just the way it is, but it actually came out of our passions together. And so I guess I'm encouraging us to think about, if we're trying to be faithful to that rich and exciting story, what does that mean for us? How do we show up? What do we bring to the party here, in our workplace, in the places we live, in society in general. And then finally, how do we grow together so that we show up as a team, not as individuals? I think that's quite hard for us. You know, James is talking to like hyper-local communities of people I suspect are reasonably tightly knit. We live across a mega city. You know, he's not writing into our context where we all live in different places, etc., etc., etc. That's quite hard to work out how we show up as a team, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it. Like the thing we're doing next week is a brilliant example of us thinking about how we knit together as a team of people that show up in the world for that exciting job. So, I'm going to leave you with the quote that Rebecca read to us again. This is the task. This is what James is saying to us. James's way is neither the transformation of individuals, nor is it just change in the structures of society, but it's the formation of a countercultural community which lives an alternative social and economic relation in advance of the coming of the kingdom. I think that's the job that James is talking to us about, and something we should all talk about much more together.
Great. Thanks, Dave. We can invite Ben and the band to come back up to us. We will sing one last song together, and while we do this, we will take the offering. As we say every time, feel free to let this bucket pass you by, or the card readers to pass you by. But if you are able to give, then anything that you do give will go to that work that Dave's been talking about in the community here. So I invite you to stand if you're able as we sing one more song together. And I'm just going to pray for us before we sing this song. May what we believe shape who we are, practically and tangibly.